Number 1. Adam Winfield and the Kill Team. A Soldier's Warning. Too late. Adam C. Winfield was a U.S. Army specialist assigned to the 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry Regiment, part of the 5th Stryker Brigade Combat Team, 2nd Infantry Division. At the time of the incident in 2010, Winfield was just 21 years old, deployed to Afghanistan's volatile Kandahar province. Winfield grew up in Florida, the son of a retired U.S. Marine. Inspired by his father's service, Adam enlisted shortly after high school, believing in duty, honor, and defending his country. He was described by friends and family as intelligent, soft-spoken, and morally grounded. But once deployed, Winfield found himself in a situation that would deeply challenge his values and leave him with a moral burden that he would carry for years. Winfield's unit was sent to Kandahar, one of the deadliest regions in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. The area was thick with insurgents, and every patrol came with the risk of ambushes or IEDs. Winfield, like many young soldiers, was tasked with rooting out threats, building relationships with locals, and surviving each day. But within his own platoon, a more insidious danger was growing. Between January and May 2010, a group of soldiers within Winfield's unit formed what would later be dubbed the Kill Team, a rogue group led by Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs. The group began premeditatedly murdering Afghan civilians during routine patrols and staging the scenes to look like legitimate combat encounters. Winfield wasn't present for the first killing in January, but by February he had been approached by Gibbs, who suggested he get involved in the next operation. Winfield was alarmed. He messaged his father back in the U.S. via Facebook, saying he feared for his life and that war crimes were happening around him. "I want to do something about it," he wrote. His father, Christopher Winfield, tried desperately to notify Army officials, but was ignored and passed between departments, with no action taken in time. On May 2, 2010, the third murder occurred in the village of Kuala Ye Inzar. The Kill Team targeted an unarmed farmer named Mullah Adadad. Gibbs threw a grenade and instructed others to fire. Under pressure and fearing retaliation from Gibbs if he refused, Adam Winfield discharged his weapon, though he later claimed he deliberately missed. After the killing, the soldiers staged the body with a weapon to make it look like a hostile engagement. Photos were taken as trophies. Winfield, sickened, remained silent but guilt-ridden. In June 2010, following tips from within the platoon and discovery of the photos, the Army launched a criminal investigation. Winfield was arrested alongside others, including Gibbs, Jeremy Morlock, Andrew Holmes, and Michael Wagner. Winfield faced charges of premeditated murder, conspiracy, and dereliction of duty, with the potential for life in prison. But his legal team emphasized that he had attempted to report the crimes and had been under coercive pressure to participate. The prosecution acknowledged his limited role compared to others, especially after Morlock and Holmes gave full confessions. In a plea deal, Winfield agreed to testify against the others, including Gibbs, in exchange for reduced charges. On August 5, 2011, at a court-martial held at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Adam Winfield pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and the use of a controlled substance. The more serious charge of premeditated murder was dropped. He was sentenced to 3 years in military prison, a bad conduct discharge, and reduction in rank. Winfield served his sentence at the Naval Consolidated Brig in Miramar, California, and was released on parole in August 2012, having served roughly 16 months. After his release, he kept a low profile, though his story gained renewed attention through the 2013 documentary The Kill Team, in which he gave a haunting account of his moral struggle and failed attempt to prevent the killings. Adam Winfield's case is not a simple story of guilt or innocence. It's a chilling portrayal of moral collapse within a broken system. He was a soldier who saw evil and tried to stop it, but was trapped in a toxic command structure where speaking up could mean retaliation or death. His father, who desperately tried to raise the alarm, later said, "They didn't want to hear what we were trying to say." In court, Winfield stated, "It was my job to protect detainees and civilians. I failed. If I had done my duty, he wouldn't be dead." His remorse is evident, but so too is the tragic sense that the system failed him as much as it did the victims. The kill team scandal remains one of the most disturbing chapters of the Afghan War, not just for the crimes committed, but for the warning signs ignored and the moral courage smothered by fear. Number 2. Chelsea Elizabeth Manning, formerly Bradley Manning. 22-year-old Chelsea Elizabeth Manning was a U.S. Army Private First Class PFC intelligence analyst deployed to Iraq as part of a military intelligence unit. Before enlisting in the U.S. Army in 2007, Chelsea Manning grew up in Crescent, Oklahoma, with a troubled family life. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she faced difficulties in school, including struggles with her identity as a transgender individual. Manning was highly intelligent, but she had difficulty relating to others. After dropping out of college, she was motivated by a desire to make a difference in the world and enlisted in the Army, where she trained as an intelligence analyst. Her experience in the military was not easy. Manning faced ongoing personal struggles related to her gender identity. During her time at Fort Drum in New York, Manning began showing signs of emotional distress, and those around her noticed her erratic behavior, particularly when she was deployed to Iraq. Manning's deployment to Iraq in 2009 was pivotal. She was stationed at a forward operating base near Baghdad, where her role as an intelligence analyst involved monitoring classified communications and reports from military operations. While stationed in Iraq, Manning had access to a vast array of highly sensitive information, including diplomatic cables, classified battlefield reports, and internal communications regarding military operations. Her job involved filtering and analyzing this intelligence, which placed her in a position to witness actions and decisions that disturbed her deeply. The events leading up to Manning's decision to leak classified documents were deeply influenced by her growing disillusionment with the military and the U.S. government's actions in the Middle East. Manning allegedly began downloading sensitive material from government databases while stationed in Iraq, including videos of airstrikes, diplomatic cables, and field reports about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The most significant leak came in the form of Collateral Murder, a classified military video that showed Apache helicopter gunships firing on a group of individuals in Baghdad, including 2 Reuters journalists. Manning reportedly watched the video and felt disturbed by what she saw as an unnecessary and brutal attack. Manning said she was motivated by a desire to expose what she saw as the military's disregard for civilian life and its dishonesty regarding the conduct of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In early 2010, Manning made contact with WikiLeaks, a site known for publishing sensitive and often classified information, and began sending them thousands of documents. These leaks included the Iraq war logs, Afghanistan war logs, U.S. diplomatic cables, and Guantanamo detainee assessments. Manning explained that she wanted to make the world a better place by giving the public access to information about the wars. Manning's actions were discovered when an FBI informant, Adrian Lamo, learned of the leaks. Lamo, who had known Manning from an online friendship, reported her to authorities in May 2010. Manning was arrested and charged shortly afterward. The U.S. government's response to the leaks was swift. Manning was charged with 22 offenses, including aiding the enemy, which is one of the most serious charges in military law. Other charges included theft of government property, transmitting national defense information, and espionage. The investigation uncovered that Manning had been in possession of large quantities of classified information, much of which had been made available to WikiLeaks. The defense argued that Manning was a whistleblower, motivated by a desire to expose government wrongdoing. They emphasized Manning's emotional distress and feelings of alienation in the military, as well as her gender identity issues, which they claimed contributed to her unstable state of mind at the time of the leaks. The prosecution, however, argued that Manning's actions endangered U.S. personnel and compromised national security. They argued that by providing classified materials to WikiLeaks, Manning was aiding hostile actors and endangering lives. In July 2013, Manning was convicted of 20 of the 22 charges, including espionage, theft, and unauthorized disclosure of classified material. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison, a term that was seen by many as excessive, given her status as a young and relatively low-ranking soldier. During the trial, Manning made a public statement acknowledging her role in the leaks, expressing remorse for how the leaks had impacted the lives of others. In 2017, After serving 7 years of her sentence, Manning's sentence was commuted by President Barack Obama. Manning was released from prison in May 2017, and her sentence was reduced to 7 years. Since her release, Manning has been vocal about her experiences and has become an advocate for LGBTQ rights, especially for transgender individuals in the military. She has also spoken out about the treatment she received while incarcerated, including allegations of solitary confinement and mistreatment due to her gender identity. Number 3. First Sergeant Johnny Hatley. Johnny Hatley was 35 years old at time of deployment, 35 years old U.S. Army, 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Infantry Division. He first sergeant in charge of troops during deployment in Iraq. John Hatley was raised in a small town in the United States and enlisted in the Army in the early 1990s. He had a passion for serving his country and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a highly respected first sergeant. Hatley joined the Army looking for purpose and a sense of duty, driven by the desire to protect his country and help others. He was known as a dedicated soldier with a reputation for being a tough but fair leader. Hatley was deployed to Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2007. His unit was stationed in the volatile region near Baghdad, where insurgent activities were frequent. As first sergeant, Hatley was responsible for the discipline and welfare of his unit. He was directly involved in various combat operations and detainee handling, which would become central to the case. In May 2007, during a mission in Iraq, Hatley and his soldiers apprehended several Iraqi detainees suspected of being insurgents. The detainees were placed in custody by Hatley's unit. According to military records and testimonies, Hatley and 3 other soldiers, Sergeant Michael Hensley, Specialist Christopher W. Ricks, and Specialist William P.L., executed 4 unarmed detainees in a remote area. The detainees were bound, blindfolded, and shot at close range. The soldiers allegedly staged the scene to make it appear as though the detainees had been involved in combat, planting weapons on them after the execution. The execution was carried out without any immediate threat from the detainees, and there was no justification for lethal force. Hatley reportedly took part in the decision to kill the detainees, with several soldiers, including Hensley, testifying that he was involved in the planning and execution of the murders. In 2008, the case came to light when an anonymous tip-off prompted a military investigation into the actions of Hatley and his men. The investigation revealed that Hatley had been involved in the unlawful killings, and multiple soldiers testified against him and the others involved. A military court was convened to examine the charges of premeditated murder and other violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. Hatley was charged with 4 counts of premeditated murder, among other offenses. The case centered on whether Hatley had authorized or participated in the executions, as well as whether the killings were premeditated. The defense argued that Hatley was a respected leader and had acted under extreme conditions in a combat zone. His legal team suggested that the killings might have been an unfortunate consequence of the intense stress faced by soldiers in the field. The prosecution argued that there was no justification for the executions, and that Hatley had violated the rules of engagement by personally overseeing the murders of unarmed prisoners, making it a cold-blooded act of violence. In 2009, Hatley was convicted of 4 counts of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army and was stripped of all military benefits. The court-martial highlighted the severity of the breach of conduct, stating that Hatley's actions not only violated military ethics, but also tarnished the reputation of the U.S. military. After serving approximately 11 years in prison, Hatley was granted parole in 2020 after serving his sentence at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The parole board cited his good behavior during incarceration and the fact that he had expressed remorse for his actions. However, the case remains controversial, with some arguing that his release was premature given the severity of the crime. Number 4. Andrew Holmes Specialist. Andrew Holmes is an infantryman responsible for engaging enemy forces during deployments in Afghanistan. Andrew Holmes was born and raised in the United States. Prior to enlisting, he was a high school graduate with few clear career aspirations. Seeking stability and purpose, Holmes joined the Army at the age of 18. driven by a desire to serve his country and to gain military experience. Holmes saw military service as an opportunity to escape his circumstances, and he was eager to prove himself in a structured environment. He believed that joining the Army would offer him not just a career, but a chance to be part of something greater than himself. Afghanistan, in the Panjwai district, a known hotspot for insurgent activity, Holmes was deployed as part of a striker brigade to help combat insurgents in Afghanistan. His primary responsibilities included engaging with enemy forces and providing security. However, during this deployment, Holmes became involved in a notorious series of events that would alter his life and tarnish the reputation of his unit. In 2010, while deployed in Afghanistan, Holmes became part of a rogue unit within his striker brigade known as the Kill Team. This unit, led by several soldiers including Holmes, engaged in the unlawful targeting and murder of Afghan civilians. The incident at the heart of the case occurred when Holmes and his fellow soldiers shot and killed a 15-year-old Afghan boy who was allegedly unarmed. Holmes, acting under orders, fired on the civilian, part of a larger pattern of killings that the Kill Team had been carrying out. Following the murder, Holmes and his comrades posed for photographs with the body of the boy, a disturbing and unsettling display that would later be revealed as part of a broader campaign of violence carried out by the unit. The rogue unit had been systematically targeting and killing Afghan civilians, sometimes staging the scene to make the killings appear as though they were part of a legitimate military operation. This culminated in a pattern of violence that contradicted the ethical and legal standards of military conduct. The truth about the Kill Team came to light in 2010 when one of the soldiers, Specialist Adam Winfield, reported the murders to his parents, eventually leading to an investigation by the U.S. Army. As the investigation unfolded, numerous soldiers, including Holmes, were implicated in the killings. Several soldiers admitted to their involvement, while others denied participating in the murders. Holmes was charged with the murder of the 15-year-old boy and other related offenses, including the violation of military rules of engagement and misconduct. During the court-martial, Holmes pleaded guilty to lesser charges, acknowledging his role in the shooting of the boy, but avoiding the more severe charges of premeditated murder. Holmes's defense team argued that he had acted under the influence of superior officers and that the actions of the Kill Team were driven by a culture of violence that had developed within the unit. The defense portrayed Holmes as a young soldier who had been pressured to follow orders without questioning them in the high-stress environment of combat. The prosecution argued that Holmes, despite being a young and impressionable soldier, had actively participated in the unlawful killings and posed for photographs with the body, which indicated his involvement and personal responsibility for the actions. In 2011, Holmes was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in the killings, a relatively lenient sentence given the severity of the crime. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army and stripped of his military benefits. His case drew widespread criticism due to the gruesome nature of the murders and the fact that soldiers had posed for photos with the bodies of the victims. Holmes served 4 years in prison before being released on parole in 2014. The parole board took into account his relatively young age, his plea deal, and his apparent remorse for his actions. Since his release, Holmes has largely stayed out of the public eye. The case of the Kill Team continues to spark debate about the psychological toll of war on soldiers, the breakdown of military ethics, and the dangers of groupthink in combat zones. Number 5. Lynndie England. Lindy England was a U.S. Army Reserve Specialist, 372nd Military Police Company. Lindy was the military police officer responsible for overseeing detainees and maintaining order at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Lynndie England was born in 1984 in the United States. Prior to joining the military, she lived in a small town and attended high school, where she had no prior law enforcement or military background. England, like many young recruits, sought a sense of direction and purpose through military service. England enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserve at the age of 18, looking for financial stability and a structured environment. At the time, she also sought adventure and an opportunity to travel, with little awareness of the gravity and potential moral implications of serving in a conflict zone like Iraq. Abu Ghraib prison, located near Baghdad, Iraq. As part of the 372nd Military Police Company, England was deployed to Iraq in 2003 to manage and oversee detainees at the notorious Abu Ghraib prison. The prison, which held detainees under suspicion of being involved in insurgency or terrorism, became infamous for widespread human rights abuses and mistreatment of prisoners. In 2003, as part of the U.S. military's occupation of Iraq, the 372nd Military Police Company was assigned to guard the Abu Ghraib prison. The detainees held there were often subjected to harsh interrogation techniques and brutal conditions. England, along with several other members of her unit, including Charles Grainer, Sabrina Harmon, and others, became implicated in the abuse of detainees. The abuses included physical violence, psychological mistreatment, and sexual humiliation. England was photographed posing with naked detainees who were being forced into degrading positions. One of the most infamous photographs showed her holding a leash attached to the neck of a detainee, smiling as though posing for a photo. These images, along with others depicting detainees being stacked in human pyramids and subjected to other degrading acts, would later be leaked to the media, exposing the abuse at Abu Ghraib to the world. The photographs and accounts from other soldiers painted a grim picture of the routine and systematic abuse carried out by members of the 372nd Military Police Company, particularly under the supervision of Grainer, who was accused of instigating and encouraging the mistreatment. In 2004, after the photographs surfaced, an internal military investigation was launched, and the abuse at Abu Ghraib became a major international scandal. Several members of the 372nd Military Police Company, including England, were investigated for their roles in the mistreatment of detainees. The U.S. military initially attempted to downplay the extent of the abuse, but the photographs and testimonies from former detainees left little room for denial. The abuse was later classified as a violation of both international human rights law and the U.S. military's code of conduct. Lindy England was charged with multiple counts of abuse, including conspiracy to mistreat detainees, maltreatment of prisoners, and dereliction of duty. She faced a military trial for her role in the scandal. England's defense team argued that she was following orders and that the abuse was part of a larger systemic failure, rather than an isolated incident. They also claimed that England had been under the influence of more senior officers, particularly Charles Grainer, who was depicted in several of the photographs alongside her. The prosecution argued that England had willingly participated in the abuse, which went beyond following orders and entered into the realm of personal responsibility for the treatment of detainees. In 2005, England was convicted on several charges, including conspiracy, maltreatment, and dereliction of duty. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her involvement in the abuse of detainees at Abu Ghraib. England's case, along with those of other members of her unit, raised questions about the role of senior leadership in fostering a culture that allowed such abuses to occur. Many critics argued that those in higher ranks who encouraged or permitted the behavior were not held to the same standard of accountability as the lower-ranking soldiers like England. After serving a portion of her sentence, England's legal team appealed the conviction, claiming that her actions were part of a broader culture of misconduct and that her involvement had been exaggerated in the media. In 2009, her sentence was reduced by 3 years, and she was released from prison in 2017 after serving 6.5 years. The release of England was met with mixed reactions. Some believed that she had paid the price for the actions of others, while others felt that she should have been held accountable for the full extent of the abuse. England has since stayed out of the public eye, with little known about her life after prison. The fallout from the Abu Ghraib scandal, however, continues to haunt her reputation and that of others involved. Number 6. Justin Robert Fisher, the murder of Barry Winchell. Justin Robert Fisher was a U.S. Army specialist stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky in 1999. He served in the 101st Airborne Division and was 21 years old at the time of the incident. His rank and role positioned him as a more experienced soldier among his peers, including Private First Class Barry Winchell, his roommate. Before enlisting in the military, little public information is available about Fisher's early life. What is known is that he entered the military during the "don't ask, don't tell" era, a time when open discussion of sexuality in the armed forces was taboo and homophobia often went unchecked. This environment would set the stage for a tragic chain of events. At Fort Campbell, Fisher shared living quarters with Barry Winchell, a 21-year-old infantryman from Missouri. Winchell was developing a romantic relationship with Calpurnia Adams, a transgender showgirl in nearby Nashville. Though the relationship was private, it became known among fellow soldiers, igniting harassment and ridicule. Fisher played a central role in instigating and escalating the bullying directed at Winchell. He often mocked him, spread rumors, and created a hostile living environment. Another soldier, Private Calvin Glover, younger and known for erratic behavior, was influenced by Fisher's constant taunts and encouragement. On July 4, 1999, after a night of drinking and tensions brewing, Glover entered the barracks room where Winchell was sleeping and repeatedly struck him in the head with a baseball bat. Fisher was present that night and later helped clean up the scene and misled investigators in the hours following the attack. Winchell was taken to the hospital but died from massive head injuries the next day, on July 5th. The murder sent shockwaves through the military and national media, especially within the LGBTQ+ community. The brutal killing prompted a full military investigation. Calvin Glover was charged with murder and eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole. Justin Fisher was charged as an accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. He accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to several charges, and was sentenced in 2000 to 12.5 years in military prison. The investigation highlighted the toxic culture within some military ranks and sparked a national conversation about don't ask, don't tell. Although Fisher was sentenced to over a decade in prison, he was transferred to a halfway house in August 2006 and officially released in October 2006 after serving roughly 7 years. His early release outraged LGBTQ+ advocates and Barry Winchell's family, who felt that Fisher's role in enabling and encouraging the fatal attack warranted a harsher punishment. Following the case, the Department of Defense conducted internal reviews on harassment and policy failings. Barry Winchell's mother, Pat Cuddleese, became an outspoken advocate for LGBT police rights and pushed for the eventual repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was overturned in 2011. Fisher has never publicly expressed remorse in a detailed or personal way, and little is known about his life following his release. The murder of Barry Winchell is now widely regarded as a hate crime, fueled by institutional silence and peer harassment. Number 7. Derek Miller and the killing of Atta Muhammad. Combat judgment or war crime. Derek Miller was a U.S. Army National Guardsman from Maryland, serving as a military police sergeant at the time of the incident in 2010. He was deployed to Afghanistan as part of a unit responsible for security operations and detainee management in volatile conflict zones. Prior to his deployment, Miller was a husband and father of 2, with aspirations beyond his military career. Friends and colleagues described him as patriotic, disciplined, and deeply committed to protecting his fellow soldiers. His National Guard service was part of his broader commitment to defending the country while balancing a civilian life at home. Miller was deployed to Kunar Province, Afghanistan, a region notorious for insurgent activity. On the day of the incident, he was stationed at a military outpost where security was paramount and tensions ran high. The rules of engagement were strict, but so was the ever-present threat of ambushes and suicide bombings. On September 26, 2010, an Afghan man named Atta Muhammad was apprehended near a security perimeter, acting suspiciously. U.S. soldiers suspected he might have been scouting for an attack. During an impromptu interrogation, Sergeant Derek Miller began questioning Muhammad to determine his intentions. Accounts state that the situation became increasingly tense. Miller later claimed that Muhammad gave conflicting answers and reached for his weapon. In that moment, Miller says he believed Muhammad was about to attack. At close range, Miller shot Atta Muhammad, killing him on the spot. 2 other U.S. soldiers were nearby. One testified later that he saw Miller straddling Muhammad before pulling the trigger. Another soldier described the environment as tense, but said he did not see a clear threat warranting deadly force. After the shooting, Muhammad's body was taken by local villagers and buried. The U.S. Army quickly opened an investigation. Miller was arrested and charged with premeditated murder under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Prosecutors argued that the detainee was unarmed, restrained, and did not pose an imminent threat, making the shooting unjustified and outside the rules of engagement. They emphasized that this was a calculated act, not one made in the heat of battle. Miller's defense argued that in the chaos and danger of a combat zone, split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death. Miller believed Muhammad was an insurgent, and he acted on instinct to protect fellow soldiers. In July 2011, Derek Miller was found guilty of premeditated murder by a military panel. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. His military service ended in disgrace with a dishonorable discharge, stripping him of all military benefits. Miller was sent to the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where he began serving his sentence. Years later, the case garnered attention from military advocacy groups and lawmakers, who argued that Miller was being punished for doing his job in a hostile environment. They claimed his decision was not criminal, but the result of a soldier trying to protect his unit. In 2018, after a clemency review, Miller's sentence was reduced from life to 20 years, making him eligible for early release. In May 2019, Miller was granted parole and released after serving approximately 8 years. He re-entered civilian life and maintained that he acted according to his training and perception of danger. Number 8. Sabrina Harmon in the Abu Ghraib abuse scandal. Smiles in a dark room. Sabrina D. Harmon was a U.S. Army Reserve specialist, part of the 372nd Military Police Company. At the time of the incidents in late 2003, she was 26 years old, serving as a military police officer stationed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, just outside Baghdad. Born in Virginia and raised in a working-class family, Harmon was described by those close to her as kind-hearted and soft-spoken. She worked in a bakery before enlisting in the Army Reserve. She joined partly for educational benefits and to serve her country, never expecting to be deployed into a combat zone. In 2003, Harmon was deployed to Abu Ghraib, a facility that had previously been a site of brutal oppression under Saddam Hussein, and was repurposed by U.S. forces as a holding center for detainees suspected of insurgent activity. The prison was overcrowded, understaffed, and under constant threat from outside attacks. Tensions ran high, and orders came down from intelligence units to soften up detainees for interrogation. Between October and December 2003, Sabrina Harmon became embroiled in a scandal that would shock the world. Along with several other soldiers, including Charles Grainer, Lindy England, and others, Harmon was photographed posing beside abused, hooded, and naked detainees. One of the most infamous photographs showed Harmon smiling next to a pile of naked human bodies, stacked on top of each other like garbage. In another, she stood near a hooded man forced to balance on a box with wires attached to his fingers, threatened with electrocution if he fell. Harmon later claimed she was not the one who ordered the abuse, but admitted to documenting it with her camera. Her defense was that she wanted to preserve evidence of wrongdoing, but critics questioned why she smiled in the photos. In letters to her girlfriend back home, Harmon described what she witnessed in Abu Ghraib as wrong and said she cried at night over the conditions. She also confessed, "I don't know how to explain what I've done." The abuse came to light in early 2004 when Specialist Joseph Darby, another MP at Abu Ghraib, reported the photographs to his superiors. What followed was an explosive internal investigation by the U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Command, and eventually a media firestorm after the photos were leaked to 60 Minutes too. Sabrina Harmon was charged with multiple offenses, including maltreatment of detainees, conspiracy to maltreat detainees, dereliction of duty. During her trial, prosecutors argued that Harmon was complicit in the abuse and did nothing to stop it. Her defense claimed she was a low-level soldier following the lead of intelligence operatives and higher-ranking MPs, and that she lacked the authority to intervene. In May 2005, Sabrina Harmon was convicted of maltreatment and dereliction of duty. She was sentenced to 6 months in prison, a bad conduct discharge, and reduction in rank. She served her time at a military detention facility and was released in September 2005 after serving her sentence. After her release, Harmon returned to civilian life, largely avoiding the public spotlight. She has never granted an extensive interview, and many believe the photographs continue to haunt her life. Number 9. Clint Lawrence, Fire Order in Kandahar. Clint A. Lawrence, a U.S. Army First Lieutenant, was 28 years old at the time of the incident. He had been newly assigned as a platoon leader with the 4th Brigade Combat Team, 80th Airborne Division during his deployment to Afghanistan in 2012. Lawrence took command of his platoon under abrupt and stressful circumstances, stepping in after the previous leader had been wounded. Raised in Oklahoma, Lawrence grew up with strong patriotic values and a desire to serve his country. He enlisted in the Army after high school, eventually commissioning as an officer. He was known to be highly motivated and outspoken. Before his 2012 deployment, Lawrence had served in Iraq, gaining experience but also a sense of frustration with the complexities of modern warfare and the rules of engagement he felt tied soldiers' hands. Lawrence arrived in Kandahar province, one of the most volatile regions in Afghanistan, in July 2012. Within 3 days of taking command of his unit, he was thrust into tense combat patrols. The environment was dangerous, with heavy Taliban activity, IED threats, and the need to quickly establish trust and authority with his soldiers, many of whom were wary of his abrupt leadership style. On July 2, 2012, Lawrence and his unit were on a routine patrol in Jaray district, an area laced with Taliban influence. During the patrol, 3 Afghan men on a motorcycle approached the unit. Believing the men posed a threat, Lawrence ordered his soldiers to open fire, resulting in the deaths of 2 of the men, while the third escaped. The decision stunned some of his subordinates. Several soldiers later testified that the men posed no immediate threat. They were unarmed, and standard rules of engagement prohibited using deadly force unless hostile intent was clear. But Lawrence defended his decision as preemptive self-defense, arguing the area had been under surveillance and the men were known to have Taliban ties. Compounding the case, Lawrence also ordered troops to fire at villagers after the initial shooting and falsified reports to make the shooting seem justified. These acts raised red flags in the chain of command. Following reports from within his own unit, an Army investigation was launched. Soldiers provided testimony that directly contradicted Lawrence's version of events. In 2013, Lawrence was charged with second-degree murder, making false statements, and ordering unlawful engagement. The prosecution's case was bolstered by the fact that 9 of Lawrence's own men testified against him, describing him as overly aggressive and dangerously impulsive. The defense argued that Lawrence acted to protect his soldiers in a hostile environment and that he was being punished for making a tough decision under extreme pressure. In August 2013, a military court at Fort Bragg found Lawrence guilty of second-degree murder and other charges. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, stripped of rank, and dishonorably discharged. Lawrence served time at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, but his case drew the attention of conservative media figures, veterans advocates, and political activists who claimed he was a victim of unjust rules of engagement. His legal team pursued clemency, and in November 2019, President Donald Trump granted Lawrence a full pardon, freeing him after serving 6 years of his 20-year sentence. Lawrence was released the same day the pardon was issued. He later became a public speaker, voicing strong support for military empowerment and national security, while his critics continued to view the pardon as undermining military discipline and accountability. The moral questions remain. In war, how do we draw the line between self-defense and murder? And when that line is crossed, who should be held accountable? Number 10. Michael Behenna. The bridge, the detainee, and a bullet. Michael C. Behenna, a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army, was 24 years old at the time of the incident in 2008. He was a member of the 101st Airborne Division, specifically assigned to 1st Platoon, D Company, 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry Regiment. Behenna served as a platoon leader, responsible for leading combat patrols and interacting with local Iraqi civilians during the height of U.S. counterinsurgency operations. Michael Behenna grew up in Oklahoma, the son of a federal prosecutor and a state investigator. Raised in a deeply patriotic family, he joined the military after college, motivated by the 9/11 attacks. Intelligent and disciplined, Behenna was seen by many as a natural leader. His deployment to Iraq came during a period of intense violence and mistrust between U.S. forces and local populations. Behenna was stationed in al-Saklawiya, Iraq, a volatile region northwest of Fallujah. His platoon had recently suffered a devastating loss. An IED explosion had killed 2 of his soldiers and seriously wounded others. The stress and trauma of losing men under his command weighed heavily on Behenna and shaped his perception of threats in the region. Shortly after the bombing, his unit detained a man named Ali Mansour Mohammed, whom intelligence reports linked to insurgent activities, including the recent attack. On May 16, 2008, after questioning and holding Ali Mansour for several days, the detainee was ordered released due to insufficient evidence. Behenna was assigned to return Mansour to his home. But instead of releasing him immediately, Behenna took a detour under a bridge near Baiji. There, in a secluded spot away from base oversight, Behenna stripped Mansour naked, interrogated him at gunpoint, and accused him of involvement in the recent IED attack that killed his soldiers. According to Behenna's later statement, Mansour made a sudden movement, prompting Behenna to shoot him twice, once in the chest and once in the head. Behenna did not immediately report the killing, and Mansour's body was found later by Iraqi police. The narrative was complicated further by the fact that a military interpreter who witnessed the shooting did not report it immediately, fearing for his safety. Photos were later recovered showing Mansour's body under the bridge, and forensic evidence contradicted parts of Behenna's self-defense claim. A formal investigation by the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division, CID, followed the discovery of Mansour's body. Behenna was charged with unpremeditated murder, making a false statement, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution argued that the killing was revenge, not defense, and that Behenna had violated military law by taking the detainee off base and executing him. Behenna claimed self-defense, stating that Mansour had reached for his gun during the interrogation, and he feared for his life. The defense brought in expert testimony, including a forensic pathologist who supported the self-defense theory, though that testimony was not initially disclosed to the jury. Despite this, in 2009, Behenna was convicted of unpremeditated murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The sentence was later reduced to 15 years, and he was incarcerated at Fort Leavenworth. Michael Behenna served 5 years before being granted parole in 2014. Over time, his case gained national attention, with many politicians, military advocates, and conservative commentators arguing that he had been unfairly punished for a split-second decision made in a war zone. On May 6, 2019, President Donald Trump granted Behenna a full pardon, citing public support and doubts about the fairness of the trial. The White House stated that Behenna's case had raised important questions about the difficult decisions service members must make in combat zones.